In Georgian England, a world with no technology to provide easy entertainment, most people filled their time with simply trying to eke out a half-decent existence. But for those privileged few with money to spare, life was very different indeed. For a young, healthy man in possession of a vast fortune, the biggest problem in life was often boredom. Some, like Richard Barry, 7th Earl Barrymore, spent their life and their fortune indulging their every whim to the detriment of almost everyone around them. But some, like Robert Barclay Allardyce, known mainly as Captain Barclay, developed an all-encompassing obsession and threw themselves into it with a commitment that's truly impressive. Captain Barclay was a pedestrian. He loved to walk, but unlike many other members of the fancy who used their status and wealth to dabble in whatever happened to appeal, Barclay didn't do things by halves. Among his many walking achievements, some of the most impressive, were walking 100 miles in 19 hours, and his record-breaking feat of walking 1,000 miles in 1,000 successive hours, 1 mile per hour, for 1,000 hours. That is 42 days. But it isn't really for his ability as a celebrated pedestrian that we care, but more for his ability as a trainer. It was Barclay who trained the up-and-coming Tom Cribb for his match against the great Jem Belcher. Barclay took Cribb to the estates of his friend, Colonel James Ogle, not far from Bromley in Kent. The training began with a course of Glauber salts to purge the body of gross humours. This is a form of sodium sulfate used as a powerful laxative. No strenuous exercise was taken during this period, for fairly obvious reasons, but Cribb was encouraged to stroll about the estate parkland as he pleased. After a week or so of this, the training began in earnest. Rising at 5 AM, he would start with a half-mile sprint uphill, followed by a 6-mile walk at a moderate pace, coming in for breakfast of rare steak and stale bread, washed down with old beer at 7 AM. Another 6-mile walk would follow before lying down without clothes for half an hour. Barclay was a firm believer that the body would not rest properly unless you undressed from your day clothes, to the point where, during his 1,000-mile challenge, he undressed and dressed again during every rest period, despite them being so short. On rising from this rest, a short walk of 4 miles would follow, before a dinner of mutton chops, bread and beer, much like breakfast. Immediately after dinner, another hill sprint followed by a 6-mile walk would be done, before retiring to bed at about 8 PM. After several weeks of this, a course of sweating was introduced. On rising, Cribb would run as fast as he could for 4 miles and then drink a pint of the worryingly named sweating liquor. This was effectively 2 pints of highly spiced sugared cider, boiled down to the requisite amount. He was then immediately put to bed in flannels and covered with 8 blankets and a feather duvet, where he lay for half an hour. On rising again, he would be rubbed dry and set out for a gentle 2-mile walk. Once this was done, he'd have breakfast, a whole roast chicken. Then the day would proceed as any other. These sweats were performed weekly until a few days before the match. During the quiet periods of the day, Cribb was encouraged to remain active, playing cricket or bowls, as Barclay considered it vital to keep both the body and mind active at all times. The diet was extremely limited, with lean beef, mutton and chicken forming the majority of his meals. No vegetables at all were allowed, and no cheese, butter or eggs. By the same token, fish was also banned for being too cold and watery. Spices were avoided apart from the sweating liquor, and the only seasoning allowed was vinegar. As for drinks, it was usually old beer. Red wine was allowed, but never more than half a pint, and plain water and milk were to be avoided. No soups were allowed. In fact, no liquids taken warm apart from gruel, or the sweating liquor. Beef broth could be drunk, but only if it had been allowed to cool and any fat removed. If the stomach were disordered, an emetic purge might be given to induce vomiting. With a combination of a high protein, low sugar and low-fat diet alongside large amounts of exercise. It's no real surprise that Cribb managed to lose almost 4 stone in weight. That's 56 pounds or 25 kilograms. By the time Barclay assessed Cribb as being in good enough shape, he'd accompany him on walks of up to 20 miles through the day, encouraging him to keep up a good pace to maintain his fitness. In his later years, Cribb would often describe how hard the gallant captain had made him work, but by Barclay's standards, Cribb's training camp was considered almost restful. In a lot of ways, Barclay was a man way ahead of his time. He was fully aware that, all else being equal, the fitter man would usually win. Or, as the famous wrestler Carl Gotch said, conditioning is your greatest hold. But more than this, he understood how difficult the training was and how mental toughness was an absolute prerequisite to success. It was exactly these two things that led Cribb to win against Belcher, when everyone there judged him to be outclassed. Belcher's technical ability was far ahead of Cribb's, but it was Cribb's endurance and mental strength that carried the day. And it was those characteristics that defined Cribb's whole career, a career for whom we can thank the great Captain Barclay.